Welcome to Football Unspoken, the home of unique football takes. As Josh, how you doing? So I've got today for you a bit of a financial discussion on our hands. But before we jump into that, I'm going to ask you the trivia. And I've given you a couple of difficult ones, so I'm going to give you a bit of an easier one with a difficult twist. Can you tell me who was the most expensive under 21 transfer of all time? And can you tell me how much they cost?
If we factored for inflation, I feel like Michael Owen would be the really obvious one.
We're not factoring for inflation. It's just straight up how much do they pay? And this is super obvious. You're going to kick yourself.
I know.
Go on, throw out one of the best players in the world currently. Just do it.
Haaland.
No.
Declan Rice.
No.
Wasn't under 21. Mbappe.
There you go. Mbappe. Mbappe from Monaco to PSG. Mbappe was 18 years old and went for 194 million. I believe that might be in dollars though. So, but yeah. So that jumping from that kind of horror show of a trivia question to the main debate, do you think that PSR and the PSR rules, specifically in the Premier League, is going to be a major hindrance to youth development?
I do, but I think maybe it's a different reason why to perhaps what you were envisioning my reaction to be. I think the financial fair play rules are transforming the Premier League and how Premier League teams or global teams actually are conducting themselves. And they're actually mirroring what Barcelona used to do in the early 2010s. So what Barcelona used to do in the early 2010s is they'd bring in all these youth players. Thiago's maybe a harsh one because he's had a decent career, but they had Bojan and Thiago, and there was a couple of other, Maxwell, I believe, as well, was another example. And they would hype these guys up, saying, this guy is the next Messi. We've been working with Messi, so we know, we see him in training, he's as good. And then they would sell him off for 40, 50, 60 million. He's probably worth about 1 million if you're lucky. And they would get all this money in, and they'd use that money to actually go buy real players like Alexis Sanchez and David Villa and those kind of guys at the time. So Barca did that trend, like I say, early 2010s, and now financial fair play has kind of forced the teams in Europe to go that route. So they've got their youth players coming through, and when you sell a youth player or players come through a youth academy, there's no... because you didn't buy the player, it's pure profit on your margins when you sell that player. So it really helps with financial fair play. So it's in the club's interest, even if the youth player is good, to just sell them because they get that free 40 million, 50 million on their financial fair play, meaning that they can go spend more on external players. So I think that's going to hinder the development of youth players because they're pretty much just being hyped up to be sold. It's kind of a funny example, but it's kind of like a farmer feeding his livestock to make them really big and juicy just to slaughter them so they can get all the meat and sell the meat.
I get where you're coming from, but I'm actually going to go, I've got kind of a bit of the opposite take. So Emile Smith Rowe is going to be the man I'm going to throw. Is his development going to be hindered more at Fulham or Arsenal?
You're making me look like a clown, but so in that case, clearly he's going to be better off going to Fulham. But my point was Arsenal have got a free 30 million out of Smith Rowe, which they've literally straight away used that to go buy Calafiori for exactly 30 million. So that's a direct, oh, cool, we got this youth asset, sell him, and we can go buy Calafiori. And they probably wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise under FFP without selling him.
Yeah, I 100% get where you're coming from. I just think in terms of it, because the one thing I will say, the sad part of me, and it's the football purist, it's this back in the noughties where your John Terrys and your Steven Gerrards and your Lionel Messis are all, and Totti's probably the most famous one club man, So from like a footballing purist perspective, yeah, it's sad, but from a football development side, I sit there and I think about players who could have potentially made it and then end up on the bench for 2 or 3, 4 seasons longer. So from a Newcastle perspective, we had Freddie Woodman, the goalkeeper who won an under-20 World Cup with England. He was very good every time he played for Newcastle. We held on to him and then they're just going on loans. But the problem is their loans are going to League One and League Two, not even Championship a lot of the time. And you don't develop in those situations. Unfortunately, you develop to a point, but you only get better by playing better players. Unfortunately, Fraser Foster was another one. To be honest, when we had Shea Given and Steve Harper going back there, he went off to Celtic, became a fantastic goalkeeper, and then came back and realistically should have been Newcastle. When he came back, he should have been Newcastle's number one, but we couldn't bring him back. Ivan Toney, another not Newcastle prospect, rather than sitting on a bench and doing nothing like your Nile Rangers, who I realistically think had more talent than Ivan Toney back then. They get an opportunity by moving, and I think PSR is forcing clubs to not hold on to these young assets for homegrown status and, trying to make qualifications. It's forcing them to actually think about, hang on, do I see a future for Emile Smith Rowe in Arsenal, or am I hanging on to him because I need X number of homegrown players in the Champions League squad? And they're looking, they go, actually, to be honest, Emile Smith Rowe, we don't need him anymore. We can sell him, and that then creates an opportunity for Emile Smith Rowe, as well as creates an opportunity for Fulham. They're getting a very good young player to come through.
Yeah, well, on the Arsenal note, what's interesting to me, and this is where my point, and maybe I had a bias towards it, but Arsenal, the players they were looking to offload this summer were Nketiah, Reece Nelson, and Smith Rowe. Those are the main three, and they're all English, and they're all homegrown. So that's why I was talking about you just helping your financial fair play in the short term, so you can go buy more international players, let's call it like that. Interestingly, they also are looking to sell Kivior, for example. So maybe it goes both ways. And diving back towards your original question about does it hinder player progression? I think so, because that's my point, was they're financially incentivized now to sell the homegrown players, where before you were equally incentivized to sell any player. It wasn't about, if anything, actually in the past, you were incentivized the other way because of those Champions League laws. 10 seasons ago, 20 seasons ago, you were incentivized to hold on to your homegrown players, even if they weren't maybe at the level you wanted, because you needed a certain amount of homegrown, which you still do now, but there wasn't the counter motivation of financial benefit. So that's why I think the pendulum has kind of swung the other way, where, like I say, 10, 20 years ago, it was the trend was more in the way of, like, when you have a top young player, bring him through the ranks and you really try hold on to him and make him club captain and build your squads around it. Now, the trend, like I say, is on the other side, where people aren't really worried about that. Of course, you're going to get exceptions to the rule, like a player like Saka or Trent comes through, and they're just so good. They would play in any squads. It's not even about homegrown or not. It's just about ability. But now that's kind of changed. You can look at Chelsea. They're looking to sell Conor Gallagher. He was captain last year. But again, because of their financial fair play, the easiest thing for them to do is to sell a homegrown player. In their case, it's particular because they've signed all these long-term contracts, 8 to 10 years. So if they were, every year that they hold onto those players, there's that whole amortization or whatever that goes on year. So they can't sell any of those players they've brought in on this long contract. So that's a unique scenario on the other end. My point is the trend is going that way, where before the trend was hold on to your Nile Rangers and players like that.
I guess my kind of follow-up question is how is it hindering them, if you get what I mean? So I'll go back to the Emile Smith Rowe situation, where he's just been sold to Fulham, where he's pretty much going to be guaranteed game time. He should be guaranteed game time. But it's an Arsenal team where even when he was fully fit and Arsenal had a couple of injuries, he wasn't getting that many games. He wasn't seeing the pitch that often. And there's a couple of other youngsters you look at, like Cole Palmer is another great example from Man City to Chelsea. He wasn't even, I think he was on the bench. He didn't even come onto the field. He was on the bench for Man City maybe 2 or 3 times before moving to Chelsea and being pretty much a starter. And I guess my question is, how is selling these players hindering their actual development? Because this is the point that a lot of people are making, that PSR is hindering young players' development by forcing teams to sell them. But no one can tell me how.
It makes the homegrown clubs less patient with their youth players, because as soon as they see a bit of money and they're not in the starting lineup, it's like, cool, this is an opportunity to sell them. Where before, because they'd hold on to them for a year or two more, you're kind of gave them a year or two more where something could happen, maybe an injury in the team, they come in and you know what, suddenly they're ready. I mean, you look at, I think Martinez at Arsenal, we've spoken about him on a previous episode, but that's actually an example. He was at Arsenal for 10 years doing the loans till he eventually, the irony is he eventually made it and got sold. So my point was he hung on for 10 years and he became the first team goalkeeper for 6 months and then got sold. My point to that is he could have been sold a lot earlier. And it feels like in this day and age, he would have been sold a lot sooner than he was. So that's my one counterpoint, is that the players get sold before they get a true opportunity to make it into the first team.
I think that's a very good counterpoint. That's probably the first counterpoint I've heard where I'm actually like, that makes a lot of sense. Because as I said there, you're starting to view them as homegrown assets rather than players. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot less patience for your Sean Longstaffs, your Emile Martinez's, even your Lewis Halls, your Cole Palmers. They're definitely going to be, I think you're going to see a lot more players moving around that age of 20 to 22. If they have 5 bad games in a season, it'll be a thing of, get them off the books. We can sell them. So I do think that could be a major impact, because also being sold in bad form is never good for your mentality.
No. One thing I did want to actually add on to the discussion was there's always been these clubs such as Sporting Lisbon and Ajax Amsterdam, etc. And they were always known for creating these players through the academies and selling them on. And they're always in the Champions League or at least the Europa. I wonder if through this whole process, those clubs actually get even stronger at doing that. My point being, if they can really even just continue, not even improve what they're doing there, but continue growing these homegrown players or homegrown assets, as you keep calling it, and then selling them on, could they get themselves into a more financially strong position and overtake a league such as the French league or something like that through that process?
That'll be very interesting to see, because it could happen, because teams will be wanting to buy young so that they can, when you buy young, a great example is the boy who got sold from Newcastle to Brighton recently. I cannot for the life of me remember his name, but we bought him a year ago for about 7 million, sent him on loan to Feyenoord. He had a couple of great games for Feyenoord. Then Brighton came in, bought him for 35 million. He never got a chance at Newcastle, but hopefully he gets a chance at Brighton. And I think that would be a very good indicator of how PSR can impact a young player's development, because he wasn't getting a chance at Newcastle. If he gets a chance at Brighton and starts playing his socks off, I think we can say that potentially PSR is doing a bit more for youth development than people are giving it credit for. But I think this has been a very interesting conversation, very interesting debate. Quite glad we were on two opposite sides of this one. And I think we're probably sticking with our positions as far as I can tell. But let us know what your guys' thoughts are. Do you think PSR is going to hamper or improve your youth development? Or do you think we're going to just start seeing players sold off much quicker? Leave us a like, leave us a comment, let us know your thoughts, and have a great week.